She was born to mend what kings could not break. The wind carved through the valley like a blade forged in the coldest forge of the north, and Alara pressed herself against the crumbling stone wall of the ruined chapel. 3 days since her exile. 3 nights since the Beta's son had declared her gift a curse, her touch a poison that brought questions instead of gratitude. The pack had cast her out with stones and spit, their voices a chorus of condemnation that still echoed in her skull even now, miles away from everything she had ever known. Her fingers were blue beneath the torn fabric of her gloves. Her breath came in shallow clouds that dissipated into the merciless air. The Northern Territories did not forgive weakness, and she had been stripped of everything: her pack bonds, her home, even the small leather satchel her grandmother had given her, though she had managed to hide a few herbs in the lining of her cloak before they dragged her to the border. But she would not weep, not for them, not for people who called healing witchcraft and mercy manipulation. The howl reached her first, raw and broken, echoing across the frozen meadow like a prayer torn from a dying throat. Then came the drag of paws through snow, heavy and desperate, each step accompanied by a wet sound that could only be blood meeting ice. Alara turned, her body moving before her mind could catch up. A wolf collapsed at the chapel's threshold. Massive, easily twice the size of any shifter she had ever seen, with fur the color of winter storms and eyes like molten silver catching the dying light. An arrow jutted from its shoulder, iron-tipped and cruel, the kind of weapon designed not just to wound, but to poison. Black veins spread from the puncture, corruption racing through muscle and sinew. The beast's chest heaved once, twice, each breath a visible struggle. Its eyes found hers across the snow, ancient, aware, and unbearably afraid. She should have run. Every instinct that had kept her alive through 3 days of cold screamed at her to flee, to let nature take its course, to preserve what little strength she had left. But her hands were already moving, reaching for the torn satchel at her waist, fingers finding the precious bundles of herbs her grandmother had taught her to gather under the full moon. Yarrow for bleeding, valerian root for pain, moonwort for poison, though she had so little left. The wolf did not growl as she approached. It did not bare its teeth or raise its hackles in warning. It simply watched as she knelt in the snow beside it, as her frozen fingers brushed the matted fur around the wound, feeling the heat of fever and infection beneath. "I know you understand me," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse and cold. "So hear this. I will not let you die in the cold like something forgotten. Not like this. Not when I can help." The wolf's eye closed slowly, deliberately, a single breath that might have been acceptance, trust or surrender, or perhaps simply the last choice of a creature that had run out of options. Alara wrapped her fingers around the arrow's shaft, feeling the corrupt iron burn against her skin, and pulled with all the strength left in her exhausted body. The wolf's howl shattered the evening silence, and then there was only blood and snow and the frantic work of keeping death at bay. The fire crackled low in the chapel's crumbling hearth, fed by broken pews and desperate prayers. Alara had dragged the wolf inside, inch by agonizing inch, her muscles screaming protests that her mind overrode with sheer, stubborn will. Now it lay before the flames, breathing steadily, the wound packed with her grandmother's poultice, yarrow and valerian mixed with ash and moonwater. The old recipe that had saved dozens before the pack decided such knowledge was dangerous. She sat against the opposite wall, exhausted beyond measure, watching the rise and fall of its ribs. The corruption had stopped spreading. The black veins were fading to gray. It would live, she thought. It would survive what should have killed it. Silver eyes opened, fixing on her with unnerving intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. There was thought there, personality, soul. "You're no ordinary wolf," she murmured, pulling her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders. "Are you?" The beast shifted, barely, painfully, and something flickered in its gaze that looked remarkably like embarrassment, caught with gratitude and sorrow, all tangled together. Recognition of what she had done, and perhaps shame that it had needed doing. Outside, the wind howled like the voices of her old pack, calling her worthless, calling her cursed, calling her dangerous for asking why the beta's son could beat his wife bloody, but her healing hands were the real threat to their precious order. But here, in the amber glow of dying embers, with this creature who had trusted her enough to let her touch its wound and pull iron from its flesh, Ilara felt something she had not felt in years. Purpose. The wolf's breathing deepened, evening into the rhythm of true sleep rather than unconsciousness. Healing sleep. Ilara closed her own eyes, her hand still resting on the makeshift bandage, feeling the steady beat of life beneath fur and muscle. She did not see the silver light beginning to gather beneath its fur, spreading like moonlight through water. She did not hear the bones beginning to shift, the ancient magic responding to her touch in ways that defied the natural order. She only felt the warmth of another living being nearby, and for the first time since her exile, she did not feel completely alone. Dawn would bring questions, dawn would bring choices. But for now, there was only firelight and breathing and the small miracle of survival against impossible odds. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. Dawn broke pale and merciless across the northern valley. Ilara woke to silence, the specific, weighted silence that comes not from absence but from change. Her eyes snapped open, immediately searching for the wolf. The space before the hearth was empty. The bandages lay discarded near the dying embers, stained with blood and poultice, but no longer wrapped around fur and muscle. Panic seized her chest. Had it fled? Had infection taken hold after all? Had she failed? Instead, a man stood at the shattered window. He was tall, broad-shouldered beneath the remnants of her cloak, wrapped around his torso like makeshift clothing. Dark hair fell past his collar in waves that caught the morning light, and when he turned at the sound of her movement, his eyes were silver, the same impossible silver that had watched her through the wolf's gaze just hours before. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Her body tensed, preparing to run, to fight, to do whatever survival demanded. But something in his posture stopped her. He stood rigid, almost formal, one hand pressed against the window frame as if he needed the support. Vulnerable, despite his size. You... Her voice fractured, unused and uncertain. You're a shifter. He did not speak immediately. His hand rose to his shoulder where her poultice still clung to skin marked by a fresh scar, pink and healing but unmistakably there. Proof of the wound that should have killed him. His jaw tightened, working as if words were physical things that required force to expel. When he finally met her eyes again, there was something broken in his expression that transcended physical injury. "I am Kyle," he said, voice low and rough as stone grinding against stone in the depths of ancient mountains. Alpha King of the Northern Territories. The title hung in the air like smoke from green wood, heavy, choking, impossible to ignore. Ilara felt the weight of it settle over the small chapel, transforming the space from refuge to something far more complicated. Kings did not collapse bleeding in the snow. Kings did not trust exiled Omegas to touch their wounds. Kings did not stand vulnerable and half-naked in ruined chapels, wearing nothing but borrowed cloth and shame. "Then why were you dying alone?" she asked, pushing herself upright despite her body's protests. "Where were your guards? Your pack? Your kingdom?" Kyle's gaze darkened, silver turning to storm clouds. "Because I deserved to." He told her in fragments, standing rigid by the window as if confession required distance and looking at her would make the words impossible. His voice was careful, measured, each sentence placed like stones in a wall he was building between himself and absolution. 2 years ago, his beta, a man named Marcus who had served Cale's father and grandfather before him, had been accused of treason. The evidence was damning. Correspondence with rival packs, detailed plans to poison the king's guard during the winter solstice, maps showing weak points in the keep's defenses. Everything pointed to betrayal of the highest order. Kyle had been furious, betrayed. The man he trusted most, the advisor who had taught him strategy and honor, had sold him to his enemies. So he had ordered the execution without trial, without investigation, without mercy. Swift justice for swift treachery. Marcus had been beheaded in the courtyard at dawn, while his wife and 3 children watched from their locked chambers. Only 3 months later did the truth surface like a corpse in melting snow. The letters were forged, crafted by a rival alpha who wanted Marcus's position and Cale's trust broken simultaneously. The maps were real but outdated, training materials Marcus had used to teach the younger guards. The poison plot was fiction, elaborate and convincing, but ultimately hollow. Marcus had been innocent, loyal unto death, and Cale's hasty judgment had orphaned 3 children and destroyed the most loyal family in his kingdom. "I could not undo it," Kyle said, voice hollow as winter wind through empty halls. "I went to the widow. I offered her everything, gold, land, a place of honor in the court. She spat in my face. Told me her children would grow up knowing their father died because their king was too arrogant to investigate, too proud to question, too weak to admit he might be wrong." His hand curled into a fist against the window frame, knuckles white. She was right, about all of it. So I wore the guilt like armor. I served my people harder, judged more carefully, second-guessed every decision until my council thought me paralyzed by indecision. And when the rival pack ambushed me 3 nights ago on the border, when the arrow found my shoulder and iron spread through my veins, I did not fight as hard as I should have. I let it happen. I ran until my body gave out, until the snow took me, until I thought maybe this was the justice I had denied Marcus. Ilara watched him, this king in borrowed rags, this man who carried his sin like a second skin that could never be shed. She understood that weight. She had been called cursed for healing too well, for asking too many questions, for refusing the beta's son when he demanded her hand and her silence. She knew what it meant to be judged without trial, condemned without evidence, cast out because the truth was less convenient than the lie. "You did not deserve to die," she said quietly, each word deliberate. Cale turned to her sharply, something raw and desperate flickering across his features. "You do not know what I have done. You do not understand the scope of... I know you let me heal you. I know you trusted me when your body was broken and your defenses were gone. I know you could have killed me the moment you shifted, but instead you stand there wearing my cloak and telling me your worst mistake as if confession might cleanse it." She stood, moving closer despite every instinct that warned against approaching an Alpha King. That is not the choice of a man who has given up on redemption. His hand uncurled slowly. Outside, the wind howled against the chapel walls. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, eating through the last of the broken pews. And between them, something fragile and stubborn began to take root. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. "Why did you save me?" Kyle asked, and the question sounded like it hurt. "You did not know who I was. I could have been anyone, a criminal, a murderer. Why waste your herbs and strength on a dying wolf?" Ilara met his silver gaze steadily. "Because every life deserves a choice. You had already chosen to run, to let the cold take you. I chose differently. That is what my grandmother taught me, that healing is not about deserving. It is about choosing mercy when the world chooses cruelty." Something in Cale's expression cracked, just slightly, not breaking but softening, like ice beginning to thaw. He took a step toward her, then stopped, uncertain. Your grandmother sounds wise. She was. The pack burned her as a witch 2 years after she taught me everything she knew. The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Two people marked by loss, by judgment, by the cruelty of those who feared what they could not control. Exiled and guilty, outcast and king, meeting in a ruined chapel because nowhere else would have them. "I am sorry," Kyle said finally. "So am I." And in that moment, standing in the ruins with dawn breaking cold and clean through the shattered windows, something changed between them. Not love, that would come later, earned through trials neither could yet imagine, but recognition, the acknowledgement that they had both been broken by the world and were still standing anyway. They stayed in the chapel for 2 more days while Kyle's strength returned and the corruption fully left his system. Kyle hunted during the brief daylight hours, shifting into his wolf form and bringing back hares and winter pheasant that Alara prepared over the fire with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make meals from almost nothing. At night, they sat on opposite sides of the dying embers, and slowly, carefully, they traded pieces of their pasts like currency that had value only between them. She told him about her grandmother's teachings, how the old woman had insisted that healing was not magic but listening, to the body, to the earth, to the quiet language of pain that spoke in fever and inflammation and the subtle wrongness of systems out of balance. How she had learned to read symptoms like others read books, to understand that Yarrow stopped bleeding not through supernatural means, but through natural astringency, that Valerian calmed not through curses, but through compounds that eased tense muscles and racing hearts. How the pack had called it witchcraft anyway after she saved a child from fever that should have been fatal, using nothing but herbs and song and 3 days of sleepless vigilance. How the whispers had started, unnatural, dangerous, too powerful for an Omega. How the Beta's son had come to her with an offer that was really a threat. Marry him, use her gift only as he directed, or face consequences. How she had refused, and how the consequences had come swiftly in the form of accusations and exile. "They were afraid," Kyle said, poking at the fire with a charred stick. "People always fear what they cannot control or understand. It is easier to destroy than to learn." "Is that what you tell yourself about Marcus?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but she did not take it back. Kyle flinched. "I tell myself nothing about Marcus that makes it easier, but yes, I was afraid. Afraid of betrayal, afraid of appearing weak, afraid that if I hesitated, I would lose the respect of my people. So I acted out of fear and called it strength." He told her more about the weight of the crown, how it had been thrust upon him at 16 when his father fell in battle against a rival pack that had been encroaching on their territory for months. How he had watched his father bleed out on the field, had shifted and fought his way through enemies to reach the body, had been crowned 3 days later with his father's blood still under his fingernails. How he had learned to be iron when what he wanted was to be kind, to be the king his father had been preparing him to become through years of careful teaching. Firm but fair, strong but merciful. How mercy had seemed like weakness in those early years when every alpha from 3 territories tested his rule, probing for soft spots and indecision. How he had learned to strike first, judge swiftly, show no hesitation because hesitation meant death in a world built on dominance and hierarchy. How mercy became the thing he most regretted losing, and losing Marcus the moment he understood what that loss truly cost. "My father used to say that any fool can be cruel," Cale said quietly, staring into the flames. "True strength is knowing when to stay your hand, when to question, when to admit you might be wrong. I forgot that. Or maybe I never really learned it. And Marcus paid the price." Alara watched him across the fire, seeing not the king but the boy who had lost his father too young, who had been given impossible responsibility and told to carry it without stumbling. "You were 16, alone, afraid. That does not excuse it, but perhaps it explains it. Does it matter? He is still dead. his children still fatherless, his wife still broken. It matters because you are still alive, because you have time to choose differently going forward, because guilt without action is just self-indulgence. Kyle's head snapped up, silver eyes widening. That is harsh. It is true. My grandmother used to say that guilt is the price we pay for being human, but wallowing in it helps no one. The question is what you do with it. Do you let it paralyze you, or do you let it teach you? On the third night, Ilara woke to find him standing at the window again, shoulders tense beneath the cloak she had lent him. Moonlight carved his silhouette in silver, making him look almost ethereal, caught between wolf and man, and something older than either. "They will come for me soon," he said without turning, his voice carrying across the small space. "My guard. They are tracking my scent. They will have found the ambush site by now, followed my blood trail. They are probably arguing about whether to assume I am dead or to keep searching." Ilara rose, wrapping her thin blanket around her shoulders against the cold. Her bare feet were silent on the stone floor as she crossed to stand beside him. "And when they find you?" "I return to the throne. I face what I have done and what I must continue to do. I try to be the king I should have been from the start." His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "But I will not forget this. These 3 days, this place, you. You gave me back something I thought I had buried with Marcus in the royal cemetery." "What?" He turned, and his silver eyes found hers across the narrow space between them. "The belief that one choice does not define a life, that there is still time to choose differently, that mercy is not weakness, but the hardest strength there is." Ilara's throat tightened around words she could not quite form. She had spent so long believing she was nothing, cast out, unwanted, a burden even the snow would not keep. But in this man's gaze, she saw something else reflected back at her like moonlight on still water. Worth. "Then choose well, Kale of the North," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind outside. "Because the world needs kings who remember what it means to bleed, who understand that power without compassion is just another form of tyranny, who can admit their mistakes and still stand tall." He closed the distance between them in a single step. His hand lifted, hesitating in the air between them, as if he was afraid she might vanish like morning mist. Then his fingers brushed her cheek, gentle, reverent, as if she were something sacred that might break under rough handling. "And what do you need, Ilara?" His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, calloused and warm. "What does a healer need when she has given everything to save others?" She did not have an answer. Not yet, but the warmth of his touch against her perpetually frozen skin felt like the beginning of one. Like maybe what she needed was not to be saved, but to be seen, to be valued not for what she could do, but for who she was beneath the doing. "I do not know yet," she admitted, "but I think I am starting to learn." His forehead dropped to touch hers, and for a long moment they simply stood there, breathing the same air, sharing the same small space of warmth in a world that seemed determined to freeze them both. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, his guard perhaps drawing closer. Inside, the fire crackled its dying song, and 2 broken people found the courage to believe they might be whole again. The guard arrived at dawn, just as Kale had predicted. Ilara heard them before she saw them, the thunder of paws hitting frozen ground in synchronized rhythm, the coordinated movement of a royal patrol that had trained together for years. She stepped outside the chapel into the biting morning air to find 12 wolves surrounding the clearing, all silver-tipped and battle-scarred, their eyes glowing with the intelligence of experienced shifters assessing a potential threat. One shifted first, the transformation rippling through muscle and bone with practiced ease. A woman emerged from the wolf shape, tall and sharp-eyed, with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She wore the dark leathers of a royal commander, weapons strapped to her body with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly how to use each one. Her gaze swept over Alara with cold clinical assessment, measuring threat level, loyalty, capability, before landing on Kyle, who emerged from the chapel, still half-dressed, still bearing the pink scar on his shoulder. "Your Majesty," the commander said, her voice clipped and professional, but unable to completely hide the relief underneath. "We tracked you for 3 days through conditions that should have killed you. We feared the worst." Kyle's expression shifted, becoming the mask of leadership that Alara had not seen before. His shoulders straightened, his voice deepened, carrying authority that seemed to make him physically larger. "I am alive, Commander Thorne, thanks to her." Every wolf's attention snapped to Alara like arrows finding a target. She felt the weight of their collective stares, suspicious, curious, hostile, calculating. An exile. An Omega with no pack scent, no identifying marks, no reason to be this far north except desperation. A stranger who had touched their king, who had seen him vulnerable, who represented a security risk they could not yet quantify. Thorne's jaw tightened, her hand moving unconsciously toward the blade at her hip before she forced it still. "We should return immediately, Your Majesty. The Council is in chaos. Rumors have spread that you were assassinated. The rival packs are testing our borders. We need you visible and present before someone decides this is an opportunity for a power grab. Then we will correct those rumors and remind everyone why challenging the Northern Territories is inadvisable." Kale's voice carried the weight of command, but then he turned to Alara, and his tone softened in a way that made several guards exchange glances. "Alara comes with us." Silence. Heavy and dangerous, crackling with unspoken objections. "Your Majesty," Thorne said carefully, each word chosen with diplomatic precision. "She is unclaimed, unknown. We have no record of her pack allegiance, no verification of her identity, no guarantee of her intentions. We cannot simply bring a stranger into the keep without— She saved my life when I had given up on it. When iron poisoning was spreading through my veins and I was too far gone to shift, too weak to call for help, she used her knowledge and her resources to pull me back from death." Kyle's voice hardened. "She will be under my direct protection. Any who challenge this challenge me personally. Is that clear, Commander?" Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had not asked for this, had not expected it. The logical thing would be to part ways here, to let him return to his kingdom while she continued north to whatever fate awaited exiled Omegas in the frozen wastes. But Kale's silver eyes held hers across the small distance, and in them she saw a question and a promise tangled together. "Trust me. I will not let them hurt you. You saved me, so I will save you. Choose." She nodded once, barely perceptible. Thorne's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering, but she was too well trained to openly defy her king. She bowed stiffly, her spine rigid with disapproval. "As you command, Your Majesty. But the Council will have questions. The Council always has questions. That is their purpose. Prepare horses. We leave within the hour." The guards dispersed to follow orders, but Alara caught several of them watching her with expressions ranging from suspicion to outright hostility. She was an unknown variable in their carefully ordered world, a potential threat to the king they were sworn to protect. She could not blame them. In their position, she would feel the same. Kyle returned to the chapel to gather what little he had. Alara followed, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just agreed to. Leaving the relative safety of the wilderness for a royal keep full of people who would see her as an interloper. Entering a court that operated by rules she did not know, playing a game she had never learned. Trusting a king she had known for 3 days to protect her against an entire kingdom's suspicion. "You do not have to do this," Kyle said quietly, reading her hesitation. "I can provide you with supplies, coin, a map to the Western Territories where the packs are less rigid in their hierarchies. You would be safer there than you will be in my court." Ilara looked at him, truly looked, seeing past the title and the authority to the man who had stood in moonlight and admitted his worst failure, who had let her see him broken and trusted her to help him heal. "Will you be safer with me there?" He blinked, surprised by the question. "I do not understand." "The court will question your judgment for bringing me. The council will see me as a distraction or a liability. I will make your life harder, not easier. So I'm asking, do you want me there because you believe I can help, or because you feel you owe me a debt?" Kyle was quiet for a long moment, his silver eyes searching her face as if trying to memorize it. "Both," he finally said, "and neither. I want you there because in 3 days you reminded me who I wanted to be. Because you challenged me without cruelty, healed me without demanding gratitude, saw me at my absolute lowest, and did not turn away in disgust. Because when I look at you, I see strength that has nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with choosing compassion, even when it costs you." His hand found hers. "I want you there because I do not want to do this alone anymore. And I think perhaps you do not want to be alone anymore either." Ilara's fingers tightened around his. He was right. She was so tired of being alone, of fighting for survival in a world that seemed determined to grind her down. The keep would be dangerous. The court would be hostile. But at least she would face it standing beside someone who understood what it meant to carry impossible weight. "Then I will come," she said. "But Kale, I will not be silent. I will not make myself small to fit their expectations. If they cannot accept me as I am, I will leave. I have been cast out once. I can survive it again." A smile crossed his face, small but genuine. "I would expect nothing less. And if they cannot accept you, then perhaps I need a different court." The journey to the northern keep took 4 days on horseback through terrain that grew progressively more brutal. Ilara rode beside Kale, flanked by his guard, feeling the weight of every suspicious glance and muttered conversation that stopped when she drew too close. They did not speak to her directly, did not acknowledge her presence, except to ensure she kept pace and did not stray from the group. She was a ghost among soldiers, a question mark wrapped in borrowed furs and uncomfortable silence. But Kyle spoke to her, quietly, when the others rode ahead to scout or when they made camp in the evenings. He told her about the keep, the ancient stone fortress carved into the mountainside by his great-great-grandfather, built to withstand siege and winter with equal fortitude. The throne room where his ancestors had ruled for 3 centuries, its walls lined with the shields of fallen warriors. The Hall of Names, where every person who had given their life in service to the kingdom was remembered in carved stone and eternal flame. "It is beautiful," he said one evening as they sat slightly apart from the main camp, watching the sun paint the distant peaks in shades of gold and crimson. "And cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you forget what warmth feels like. You will need to be careful. The court does not trust easily, and they have long memories." "They do not trust you either," Ilara observed, watching Commander Thorne coordinate the watch rotation with military precision. "Not anymore. Not completely." Kale's hands tightened on the reins of his horse, leather creaking. "No. I broke that trust when I broke my word to Marcus's family. I executed a loyal man without trial and called it justice. I have spent 2 years trying to earn back what I destroyed in a single morning. But trust is not rebuilt as quickly as it is shattered. And have you? Earned it back? Some days I think I am close. I see respect in their eyes again. Hear them speaking without the careful caution that suggests they are afraid of saying the wrong thing. Other days, I catch them watching me like they are waiting for the next mistake, the next hasty judgment, the next person I will condemn without proper investigation. I see the way they look at me and know the wound is still open, still bleeding in ways I cannot bandage." Ilara studied his profile in the fading light, the strong line of his jaw that spoke of determination, the weariness around his eyes that suggested too many nights without proper sleep, the set of his shoulders that carried responsibility like physical weight. Then perhaps it is not their forgiveness you need first. Perhaps the person you need to convince is yourself. He glanced at her, silver eyes catching the last of the daylight and throwing it back like mirrors. What do you mean? You speak of earning back their trust, of proving you have changed, of demonstrating through action that you will not repeat Marcus's mistake. But you do not speak of forgiving yourself for making it in the first place. She shifted in her saddle to face him more directly. How can they trust a king who does not trust himself? How can they believe in your judgment when you question every decision until paralysis sets in? You cannot lead while drowning in guilt, Kale. You can only survive, and surviving is not the same as living. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Kyle looked away, his jaw working as if grinding down arguments, or maybe grinding down the protective walls he had built around the wound that would not close. I do not know how, he said finally, so quietly she almost missed it over the evening wind. I do not know how to forgive myself for that, for taking a life without proper cause, for destroying a family, for failing in the most fundamental duty of a king, to protect his people, even from himself. Neither do I, Alara admitted, thinking of her grandmother burning while the pack watched and chanted and celebrated the destruction of knowledge they feared. I do not know how to forgive them for what they did to her, for casting me out, for calling my gift a curse when all I ever wanted was to help. But I think perhaps forgiveness is not something you achieve. It is something you practice, every day, until one day you realize the weight is lighter than it was. His hand reached across the space between their horses, bridging the distance carefully. Her fingers met his halfway, and she felt the calluses that came from sword training and hard labor, the warmth that came from being alive against all odds, the slight tremor that came from vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. Then perhaps that is something we learn together, Kyle said. And for the first time since leaving the chapel, Alara felt something loosen in her chest. Not safety. She was too practical to believe she was safe entering a hostile court as an unknown Omega under the king's questionable protection. But possibility. The chance that this gamble might lead somewhere other than another exile, another rejection, another loss. They rode on as darkness fell. And overhead, the stars emerged one by one like distant witnesses to promises neither of them quite knew how to keep. The northern keep rose from the mountain like a crown of stone and ice, its towers climbing toward the sky with the kind of ancient arrogance that came from surviving centuries of siege and storm and internal rebellion. Alara had never seen anything so vast, so deliberately imposing. The outer walls were thick enough to ride 3 horses abreast along their tops. Guards lined the ramparts at regular intervals, their armor catching the late afternoon sun and throwing it back in flashes of silver and steel. Banners snapped in the wind, silver wolves on black fields, the symbol of a kingdom that had carved its territory from frozen wilderness through blood and determination and refusal to yield. As Kale's party approached, horns sounded from the towers in a specific pattern. 3 long notes followed by 2 short, the signal that meant the king himself approached. The massive gates began to swing open, their hinges groaning with the weight of iron and reinforced oak. Inside, the keep was all granite and iron and shadows cast by flickering torchlight. The main courtyard was large enough to hold several hundred people, currently filled with servants and guards and nobles who had clearly been waiting for their king's return. They watched the party enter with expressions ranging from relief to calculation, and Alara felt every single eye eventually land on her as she dismounted awkwardly, unused to riding and sore from 4 days in the saddle. Servants stopped mid-task to stare. Nobles whispered behind gloved hands, their voices carrying just enough to make it clear they were discussing her without quite being loud enough to hear specific words. Guards stood at rigid attention, but their eyes tracked her movement, assessing threat level with the kind of professional paranoia that came from taking security seriously. And Alara felt every ounce of their attention like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders, making her want to shrink, to hide, to become invisible. But she forced her spine straight and her chin up, channeling every lesson her grandmother had ever taught about dignity in the face of judgment. Cale dismounted smoothly and immediately came to her side, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and proprietary. The whispers increased in volume. Commander Thorne was already barking orders, organizing the guard and dismissing curious onlookers with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. But even she shot Alara a look that clearly communicated this is not over before turning to her duties. Kyle led Alara through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, each one lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and battle-scarred shields that served as both decoration and warning. Servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, bowing low, their eyes downcast in the presence of their king, but sneaking glances at the strange woman walking beside him. They climbed a spiral staircase in the eastern tower, the steps worn smooth by centuries of feet. Finally, Kyle stopped before a heavy wooden door and pushed it open. The chamber beyond was simple but warm, a significant improvement over the ruined chapel. A large bed dominated one wall, its frame carved from dark wood and piled with furs that looked thick enough to survive the deepest winter. A stone hearth already crackled with fire, filling the space with blessed warmth. A large window overlooked the valley Alara had nearly died in just days before, offering a view that was both beautiful and haunting. "You will stay here," Kyle said, his voice formal, but his eyes gentle. "These are guest chambers reserved for visiting dignitaries. No one will disturb you without my explicit permission. You will have guards posted outside for your protection." Alara turned to him, reading the truth beneath his careful phrasing. "You mean to keep me from wandering where I should not wander, to contain me while you figure out how to explain my presence to your council." Kyle had the grace to look uncomfortable. Both. The court is complicated. There are factions, alliances, old grievances that have nothing to do with you, but everything to do with any decision I make. Bringing you here without warning, without proper introduction, without any of the usual protocols, it has already set tongues wagging. I need time to manage the political fallout before you are subjected to the full force of their judgment. "They hate me already," Alara said bluntly. "I could feel it in the courtyard. I am an outsider, an Omega with no pack, a mystery you have brought into their secure fortress. They think I have bewitched you or manipulated you, or that you have lost your mind in your grief and guilt. They do not know you yet. They do not understand what I—" He stopped, searching for words. "They fear what they do not understand, but I will make them see what I have seen. I swear it." Before she could respond, a sharp knock sounded on the door. Commander Thorne entered without waiting for acknowledgement, her expression tight with barely controlled frustration. "Your Majesty, the Council demands an emergency audience, immediately. They have been waiting for 4 days with no word except rumors and fear. You cannot delay any longer." Kyle's jaw set in a line Alara was beginning to recognize. The moment he shifted fully into his role as king, setting aside personal feelings for political necessity. "Then they will have their audience. Inform them I will be in the council chambers within the hour." Thorne's gaze flicked to Alara, then back to Cale. "And her? She stays here, under guard, under my protection. Make it clear to everyone that she is not to be disturbed or questioned without my presence. Your Majesty, the council will want—" "I am aware of what the council will want. I will address their concerns myself. You have your orders, Commander." Thorne's jaw tightened, but she bowed with military precision. "As you command." She paused at the door. "Your Majesty, for what it is worth, I am glad you survived. Whatever else has happened, the kingdom needs its king." She left before Cale could respond. He turned back to Alara, and she saw the weight settling onto his shoulders again. The mask of leadership replacing the vulnerability he had shown her in the chapel. I have to go. I have to face them and explain what happened and why I made the choices I made. It will not be pleasant. I know. They will question me about you. They will want to know your origins, your intentions, your value to the kingdom. They will suggest I am being foolish or reckless, or that I am compromised somehow. I know. And I will defend you. I will make them understand that you saved my life and that you are under my direct protection. But Alara... He crossed the room to stand before her, his hands reaching up to frame her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. The court is not kind. It is not forgiving. It will test you in ways I cannot protect you from. If you want to leave, if you want me to provide you safe passage elsewhere, tell me now. I will not force you to endure their cruelty just because I do not want to lose the one person who has made me feel like I might be worthy of redemption. Alara looked up at him, seeing the genuine concern in his silver eyes, the fear that she would realize the cost of staying and choose to flee. And yes, every practical instinct she possessed screamed at her to accept his offer, to take supplies and coin and run far away from this complicated, dangerous situation. But she thought about the chapel, about his confession and his vulnerability and the way he had let her touch his wounds without flinching, about how he had stood before his guard and claimed her as worthy of protection, despite every reason to abandon her at the first settlement they encountered. I will stay, she said firmly, not because you command it or because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose to, because you asked me to trust you, and I do, because maybe you need someone in this fortress who sees you as Cale first and King second, because I am tired of running. Something in his expression broke open, relief and gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them had words for yet. His forehead dropped to touch hers, and for a long moment they simply breathed together in the warm chamber while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. Then I will make them see what I see when I look at you, he whispered. Not weakness, not distraction, but courage that has survived exile and cruelty, knowledge that could serve this kingdom better than a dozen court physicians, the strength to choose mercy when the world has shown you none. He kissed her forehead gently, a gesture more reverent than romantic, and then he was gone, striding out of the chamber to face his council and the political storm he had created by bringing her here. Alara stood alone in the borrowed room, listening to his footsteps fade down the corridor. Outside the door, she heard the quiet conversation of guards taking up position. Protective or restrictive, she could not tell yet. She moved to the window, looking out over the valley that had almost been her grave. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, beautiful and deadly, like everything else in the north. A servant knocked tentatively, a young woman with dark braids and nervous eyes. "My lady, I am Mira. I have been assigned to attend you. I brought supper and fresh clothing if you wish to change from your travel garments." Alara turned from the window. "I am no lady, just Alara." Mira's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the informality. She set down her tray of food, bread, roasted meat, vegetables that must have cost a fortune this far north in winter, mulled wine that smelled of spices and warmth. Then she pulled fresh clothing from a basket, simple but well made, far better than anything Alara had owned in years. "What is your name?" Alara asked, trying to make her voice gentle despite her exhaustion. The girl flinched slightly, as if direct questions from above her station were unusual. "Mira, my lady, I mean, Alara." "How long have you worked in the keep, Mira?" "Since I was 12, 6 years now. My mother worked in the kitchens before she passed." "I am sorry for your loss." Mira's gaze flickered up, genuine surprise crossing her features. "Thank you. That is kind of you to say. They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Mira continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. The court says you are the king's guest, that you saved his life when he was dying in the wilderness. Is that all they say? Mira bit her lip, clearly debating whether honesty was wise. Finally, some call you other things. A witch, a manipulator, an exile who has somehow bewitched our king into bringing danger into our home. But Commander Thorne silenced them. She said anyone who disrespects the king's word would answer to her blade personally. Alara's chest tightened. So Thorne did not like her, but was loyal enough to Kale to enforce his protection. That was something, at least. Thank you for your honesty, Mira. It is better to know what I face than to stumble blindly into their judgment. Mira nodded and fled, closing the door softly behind her. Alara sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind racing with everything that had happened in the last week. Exile, near death, meeting Kale, healing him, learning his secrets. And now this, trapped in a gilded cage, while a court she did not know decided whether she was worth keeping or discarding. She changed into the fresh clothing and lay down on the bed, pulling the furs around her. Through the window, the moon rose full and silver above the peaks, and Alara felt something stir inside her. Something old and waiting. Something that had slept since her exile, but was now waking in response to this place, this situation, this impossible choice she had made to stay beside a broken king in his fortress of stone and suspicion. Her gift was not gone. It had only been waiting for the moment it would be needed most. And somehow she knew that moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. 3 days passed in careful isolation. Alara saw no one but Mira, who brought meals 3 times daily along with nervous smiles and whispered updates about court gossip she probably should not have been sharing. The king was in constant meetings with his council. The nobles were divided about his mysterious guest. Commander Thorne had personally stopped 2 separate attempts by curious courtiers to accidentally encounter Alara in the halls. Alara spent her hours in the chamber, restless and caged despite the comfort. She stood at the window for long periods, watching the keep's rhythms, bells marking meals and guard changes, servants hurrying between buildings with purpose, nobles moving in small clusters like schools of fish, their fine clothing bright against the gray stone. She listened to the keep's distant sounds, horns for arrivals, the clang of the training yard, the low hum of a fortress alive with hundreds of purposes that had nothing to do with her. On the 4th morning, Kyle finally came. He looked exhausted in a way that transcended physical tiredness. Shadows clung beneath his silver eyes like bruises. His shoulders carried visible weight that seemed to have increased rather than decreased. His jaw was tight, and when he closed the door behind him, she saw his hand tremble slightly before he forced it still. "They want me to send you away," he said, without preamble, his voice rough from too much talking and not enough sleep. "The council. They believe you are a distraction, a liability, an unknown element in a kingdom that values security above all else." Alara's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "And what do you believe?" Kale crossed the room in 3 strides. His hands framed her face, calloused and warm, and his eyes burned with something fierce and desperate and utterly honest. "I believe you saved my life when I did not deserve saving. I believe you saw me at my lowest and did not turn away in disgust or fear. I believe—" His voice cracked. "I believe you are the first person in 2 years who has made me want to be the king I was meant to be instead of the one I became after Marcus." Alara's breath caught. "Kyle, they do not understand, but I will make them. I will show them what I see when I look at you. Not weakness, not distraction, but the courage to survive exile and cruelty. Knowledge that could serve this kingdom better than a dozen court physicians who are too proud to learn from an Omega. The strength to choose mercy when the world has shown you none. His forehead pressed to hers, and for a long moment, they simply breathed together, two people fighting against systems designed to keep them apart. "Stay," he whispered. "Please. I know I have no right to ask. I know this place is hostile and dangerous for you. But stay, not because I command it, but because together we might be able to change something. Because I need someone who reminds me why mercy matters." Ilara's hands rose to cover his, her fingers intertwining with his against her cheeks. "I will stay, but not because you need me to, because I choose to, because I see who you are trying to become, and I want to help you get there." Something in his expression broke open, relief and gratitude, and something deeper they were both too afraid to name yet. Outside, the wind howled against ancient stone. Inside, the fire crackled its eternal song. And between them, the bond forged in blood and snow grew roots that would not be easily torn. That evening, Kyle insisted she attend dinner in the Great Hall. Despite Mira's protests about proper court dress and protocol, Ilara wore simple clothing and walked beside Kyle with her head high. The hall fell silent as they entered. Hundreds of eyes tracked their movement. Whispers erupted and died and erupted again. Kale led her to the high table where his council sat, 12 faces ranging from openly hostile to cautiously neutral. Commander Thorne occupied the seat of honor at his right hand, her expression unreadable. "This is Ilara," Kale announced, his voice carrying across the hall. "She saved my life when iron poisoning should have killed me. She is under my direct protection. She is my honored guest. Any who challenge this challenge me." The old Alpha, who had questioned her presence before, stood slowly. "Your Majesty, with respect, we must know more. Her pack, her lineage, her intentions. You ask us to accept her on faith alone. I ask you to trust my judgment. Your judgment has been compromised before." The hall went deadly silent. The reference to Marcus hung in the air like poison. Kale's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Ilara stood. "My pack cast me out for healing too well," she said clearly. "For asking questions they did not want answered. For refusing to marry a man who beat his first wife. I have no lineage worth claiming. My grandmother was burned as a witch for teaching me her healing arts. My intention is to survive in a world that seems determined to destroy anyone who chooses compassion over cruelty." She turned to face Kale. "Your king found me dying in the snow. I found him dying from iron poisoning. We saved each other. If that is not enough for you, then send me away. But do not pretend your objection is about security. It is about fear of anything that does not fit your careful categories." The old Alpha's face darkened. "You dare speak to this council?" "She dares," Kyle interrupted, his voice like iron, "because she has earned that right. And if you cannot see the value in someone who heals rather than destroys, then perhaps you have been warriors so long you have forgotten what we are supposed to be protecting." Commander Thorne cleared her throat. "Your Majesty, perhaps there is a way to address the Council's concerns while respecting your decision. A demonstration of her claimed abilities. If she truly possesses healing knowledge beyond the ordinary, let her prove it." Kale looked at Thorne sharply, searching for trap or ally. Thorne's expression remained neutral. "I accept," Ilara said before Kale could object. "What would you have me do?" "Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth." The demonstration was set for the following day in the Keep's infirmary. The head physician, an elderly man named Aldrich with more pride than sense, had selected 3 patients he deemed beyond current help. A soldier with a festering wound that refused to heal, a child burning with fever no remedy could break, an old woman whose lungs filled with fluid faster than they could drain it. "If your methods can help these 3, Aldrich said with barely concealed skepticism. Then perhaps you have some value beyond warming the king's bed. Alara ignored the insult. Kyle did not. His hand went to his sword, but she touched his wrist gently. Let me work. She spent hours with each patient. The soldier's wound had fragments of iron embedded deep. She extracted them with careful hands and packed the site with yarrow and honey. The child's fever came from infection in her throat. Alara made a paste of elderberry and willow bark, singing the old songs her grandmother had taught while she worked. The old woman needed more than medicine. She needed her bed elevated and steam treatments with eucalyptus 3 times daily. By evening, the soldier's fever had broken. The child was sitting up and asking for food. The old woman's breathing had eased enough for her to sleep without drowning. The infirmary staff watched in stunned silence. Aldrich examined each patient personally, searching for tricks or deception. He found only healing. How? He demanded. I listened, Alara said simply. To their bodies, to what they needed rather than what I assumed they needed. My grandmother taught me that healing begins with observation, not assumption. That night, the council convened again. Alara stood before them while they deliberated. Finally, the old alpha spoke. You have proven your skill, but skill is not the same as loyalty. How do we know you will not use this knowledge against us? You do not, Alara said honestly. Just as I do not know if you will turn on me the moment it becomes politically convenient. Trust is a risk. You decide if I am worth that risk. Kale stood. She is, and I am tired of justifying mercy to people who mistake cruelty for strength. Alara stays, as the keep's head healer, with full access to supplies and the authority to train others in her methods. This is not a request. This is my decision as your king. Commander Thorne stood as well. I support this decision. The kingdom needs healers who can do what our physicians cannot, especially with border tensions increasing. One by one, the council members bowed their acceptance, some grudgingly, some genuinely, but they bowed. 2 weeks later, reports came from the northern border. A strange sickness was spreading through 3 villages. People were dying faster than the local healers could treat them. Kyle looked at Alara across the council table. Will you go? Of course. Commander Thorne organized an escort of 20 guards. They rode hard for 2 days, reaching the first village at dawn. The stench of death greeted them before the site. Bodies in the streets. Survivors too weak to bury them. Children crying for parents who would never wake. Alara moved through the village like a force of nature. She examined water supplies, food stores, living conditions. She questioned survivors about when symptoms started, what they ate, where they had been. And she found it. The well had been poisoned, not with disease, but with a compound of arsenic and nightshade, slow-acting and devastating. This was deliberate, she told Thorne. Someone wanted these people to suffer. Thorne's expression went deadly cold. Who? Alara worked for 3 days straight, treating victims with activated charcoal and milk thistle, forcing fluids and monitoring breathing. She taught the local healers her methods. She sang the old songs over the dying, giving them comfort if not cure. 70 people survived who should have died, and in the process, Alara's hands began to glow with soft silver light as she worked, a manifestation of her gift that she could no longer hide. The villagers whispered the old word, Pathfinder. Thorne stared at Alara with something like awe. You are no ordinary healer. No, Alara said quietly, exhausted. I never was. They returned to the keep with evidence of poisoning. Kyle's investigation moved swiftly. Thorne's network uncovered the perpetrators within days, an exiled faction loyal to Marcus, seeking revenge by destabilizing Kale's territories and turning his people against him. The leader was brought before the throne in chains. A young man with Marcus's eyes and a heart full of grief-turned rage. You killed my father, he spat at Kale. Without trial, without mercy. Did you think there would be no price? Kyle descended from his throne and did something no one expected. He knelt. The court gasped. Ilara's heart clenched. I did, Kyle said quietly, and I have carried that guilt every day since. Your father was innocent. I was wrong, and no punishment you deliver will be worse than the one I have given myself. The young man's face twisted. Then you deserve to die. Perhaps, but if I die, who protects the people you just poisoned? Who ensures your father's name is remembered with honor instead of forgotten in my shame? Kyle's voice was raw. I cannot bring him back, but I can give you a choice. Take my life here, now. Or let me live and spend every remaining day honoring his memory. I will endow your family. I will ensure his story is taught. I will carry his name as a reminder of what I must never become again. Silence stretched like a blade. The young man trembled, tears carving paths through dirt and rage. I wanted him remembered. I wanted someone to admit you were wrong. I was wrong. I am admitting it now before my entire court. Your father was loyal and innocent, and I killed him because I was too afraid to look weak. That is my sin. Let me spend my life making it right. Slowly, the young man's shoulders sagged. The fight drained from him, leaving only grief. No more death. Please, no more. Kyle stood and embraced him, the son of the man he had wrongly executed, crying against the chest of the king who had destroyed his family. The council sat in stunned silence. Even the old alpha had tears in his eyes. Ilara watched Kyle, this king who had learned to kneel, who chose mercy over pride, who was finally forgiving himself, and felt something shift in her chest. This was the man she was falling in love with. Spring came early to the northern keep, melting snow from peaks and revealing green beneath gray. The young man, whose name was Thomas, chose to stay at the keep. Kale established a memorial fund in Marcus's name, personally overseeing education programs and veteran support. Thomas worked alongside Kale, learning governance and slowly, painfully, healing. Ilara's position as head healer became official. She trained physicians in her methods, established protocols for epidemic response, and created an herbal garden that would supply the keep year-round. The court physicians who had mocked her now sought her counsel. The nobles who had whispered about her now brought their sick children for her care. She and Kale fell into a rhythm, working together during the day, finding stolen moments in the evenings to simply be two people rather than king and healer. He taught her about kingdom management. She taught him about letting go of guilt without forgetting responsibility. Commander Thorne became an unexpected ally. She trained Ilara in self-defense, claiming that anyone important to the king needed to know how to protect themselves. But in quiet moments, she admitted that Ilara reminded her why they fought, to protect people who healed rather than just warriors who destroyed. 6 months after her arrival, the council formally requested that Ilara be given permanent status. Not as a guest, the old alpha said gruffly. As one of us, as Pack, you have earned it. Ilara felt tears prick her eyes. Pack, the thing she had been exiled from, now offered freely. But Kyle had other ideas. He came to her chambers at sunset, dressed formally, his expression nervous in a way she had never seen. Walk with me? He led her to the ramparts overlooking the valley where they had first found each other. The sun painted everything gold and crimson, beautiful and wild. 6 months ago, I was dying in the snow, Kale said quietly. I had given up, on myself, on my ability to be the king my people deserved, on the idea that mercy mattered more than strength. And now? Now I wake up every morning wanting to be better, wanting to earn the trust you gave me when I was just a dying wolf and you were just an exiled healer, wanting to build a kingdom worthy of someone who sees value in healing rather than destroying. He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. The council wants to make you pack, but I want more than that. I want you beside me, not as healer to king, not as saved to savior, but as equal to equal, partner to partner. He dropped to one knee, and Alara's breath caught. Queen to king, if you will have me. Tears blurred her vision. I was cast out, rejected, called cursed and dangerous. And I was a king who forgot what mercy looked like, but you found me bleeding in the snow and chose to save me anyway. You saw the man beneath the crown. You challenged me to be better. You taught me that strength is not about never falling. It is about choosing to rise and choosing mercy when you do. His voice broke. I am not asking you to marry a king. I am asking if you will walk beside Kale, through every storm and every sunrise. Will you be my conscience when I falter, my strength when I doubt, my home when the world grows cold? Alara pulled him to his feet, framing his face with hands that had saved his life and countless others. I will, on one condition. Name it. You let me keep healing the forgotten ones, the exiles, the outcasts, the ones who need to be reminded that rejection is not the end of their story, that mercy matters, that they are worthy of saving. Kale's smile was like dawn breaking after the longest night. Always. I would expect nothing less. He kissed her then, not the desperate kiss of survival, but the hopeful kiss of beginning, of choosing each other not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because love built on mutual choice and hard-won trust was stronger than any bond of obligation or debt. When they pulled apart, the sun had set and the moon was rising, full and silver and impossibly bright. The court will be shocked, Ilara murmured against his shoulder. The court has been shocked since the day I brought you here. Let them adjust. Your enemies will use it against you. Let them try. I am tired of making decisions based on fear of judgment. You taught me that. They stood together on the ramparts, watching stars emerge one by one like distant witnesses to the promise they had just made. Below, the keep went about its evening rhythms, lights appearing in windows, guards changing shifts, smoke rising from cooking fires. Tomorrow they would announce their engagement. Tomorrow the court would react with varying degrees of acceptance and resistance. Tomorrow they would begin navigating the complex politics of an alpha king marrying an exiled omega with no pack lineage. But tonight they simply stood together, two broken people who had found each other in the snow and chosen mercy over bitterness, hope over despair, love over all the very good reasons they should have walked away. Thank you, Kyle whispered. For what? For pulling that arrow from my shoulder, for not letting me die alone, for teaching me that one mistake does not define a life, for choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier and safer, for loving me when I did not think I deserved to be loved. Ilara turned in his arms, silver light from the moon catching in her hair. And thank you for seeing me, for protecting me when your kingdom wanted me gone, for trusting my knowledge and my methods, for building a place where healing matters as much as fighting, for loving me when the world called me cursed. They kissed again under the watching moon, and somewhere in the valley below, wolves howled their approval. The wedding took place on the first day of summer, when the last of the snow had finally melted and wildflowers covered the meadows. Ilara wore a gown the color of moonlight, woven with silver thread and winter roses. Kyle wore his formal armor, polished until it reflected the sky. They stood before the ancient altar in the keep's courtyard, while the entire kingdom watched, nobles and servants, guards and healers, farmers from distant villages, and warriors from the front lines. The old alpha who had questioned her presence now performed the ceremony, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Do you, Kale, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, take this woman as your equal and your queen? I do. Before the moon and all assembled, I claim her as mine and offer myself as hers. And do you, Alara, Pathfinder and Healer, take this man as your equal and your king? Alara looked at Kyle, at the man who had learned to kneel, who had chosen mercy over pride, who had given her a home when she had nowhere left to go. I do. Before the moon and all assembled, I claim him as mine and offer myself as his. Then by the ancient laws and the witness of your people, I declare you bound, one heart, one purpose, one kingdom. They kissed as the crowd erupted in cheers and howls. Wolves shifted and sang their approval to the sky. Even Commander Thorne smiled. The feast lasted until dawn. Music and dancing filled the great hall. Nobles who had once questioned Alara now toasted her health. Healers she had trained presented her with gifts. Thomas, Marcus's son, stood and raised his cup. To the king who learned that admitting fault is stronger than never apologizing, and to the queen who taught him how. The hall roared its agreement. Late in the celebration, Alara and Kale slipped away to the ramparts, their place where everything had changed 6 months before. Do you regret it? Kale asked softly. Giving up your freedom, binding yourself to a king and a kingdom? Alara laughed. I was exiled and starving when you found me. I had no freedom except the freedom to die slowly. You gave me purpose, home, family, a chance to use my gifts to help rather than hide them. She took his hand. I regret nothing. Even when the court drives you mad with their politics? Even then. Because I can drive them mad right back by insisting we fund healing programs instead of just weapons. Kyle pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. Herbs and smoke and something uniquely her. I love you. I think I started loving you the moment you pulled that arrow from my shoulder without flinching. When you chose to save a dying wolf without knowing what it would cost you, and I love you. I think I started loving you when you told me about Marcus, when you showed me your worst mistake and trusted me not to use it against you, when you proved that kings could change. They stood together as the sun rose over their kingdom, no longer broken separately, but whole together. An exiled Omega and a guilt-ridden king, now queen and equal, building something new from the ruins of what they had been. In the valley below, in the villages and border towns, in the keep itself, people were waking to a new day. Children Alara had healed played in streets. Soldiers Kale had trained stood their watches. Thomas worked alongside the council, representing families who had been wronged but chose forgiveness. The kingdom was not perfect. There were still threats at the borders, still political tensions, still scars that would take years to fully heal. But it was better than it had been. More merciful, more just, more willing to question and listen and change. What do you think comes next? Alara asked, watching the sun paint the peaks gold. Kyle smiled. Whatever it is, we face it together, you and me, king and queen, wolf and pathfinder. Two people who chose mercy when the world offered cruelty. Together, Alara agreed. And as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist, they turned from the view and walked back into their kingdom, ready to face whatever challenges waited, secure in the knowledge that they had already survived the worst and chosen each other anyway. The wolf with silver eyes had found his healer. The exiled Omega had found her king. And together they would build a kingdom worthy of the mercy they had shown each other. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.